So first proper cardio session back after my 94-mile run. Just 1 hour, 200 watts. Trying to keep my heart rate around 140. Not really creeping any higher than 145. Just cooling down now. Felt reasonable, but first session back on a watt bike always hurts. Past couple of weeks have been quite interesting. Mentally, the complete drop off in focus and sort of looking forward to this big event. It's been quite hard to deal with, and I'll obviously talk more about the questions that you've all asked re the run itself, but physically the main thing was my feet, and because they were so sore I couldn't really walk properly and get any blood into them, which meant that my recovery was massively inhibited, and when I was trying to get to sleep and things I just couldn't get comfortable. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks. Back to training now, which is nice because I don't really do very well with inactivity, and I'm sleeping better, in a better place mentally. I think the calm down effect after such a long period of focus and drive and just complete dedication to what I was doing means that inevitably when I try and switch off it's going to be quite difficult. So I'll run you through the questions that people have asked on Instagram and just from speaking to people what people are interested in, and I will get off the watt bike, go and get showered, and then talk you through it all. So finish up here and see you soon. Hello! Sorry for such a delay in getting a proper debrief done. However, the past 2 weeks, as I mentioned earlier, have been quite interesting. A mix of mental and physical calm down, as well as a lot of just busy stuff going on in my day-to-day work life and whatnot. So finally sitting down to it, got questions ready to go and things that people have been asking quite frequently. Did a question poll on my Instagram and got a fair few themes throughout, so I'm going to focus on them throughout this. Number one, and the one that came up the most, is how did I focus on nutrition and hydration throughout the entire 22-hour period. So you won't be surprised to hear that I was pretty full of glycogen before I started. Carb loading wasn't very scientific. It involved eating a lot of carbs in the days, maybe the week in the run up to the event itself. So I was saturated before things kicked off. But other than that, quite simply, I had 14 cookies, 11 Science and Sport gels, 9 scoops of awesome supplements, electrolytes and carbs, 6 Squares bars. However, with the Squares bars, I learnt the hard way that if I was carrying them in my bag, they would freeze, which was a bit of a pain, so I had to keep them in the car. 10 bananas, 1 portion of cheesy chips from George Square Christmas markets. I didn't pay for it, but I can imagine that probably cost about 25 quid for a pretty small portion. They're like robbery, but those were the most enjoyable part of the whole thing, as it was the only savoury food that I had really. But what was interesting was that I could actually get through a fair amount of food for the first sort of 6 to 8 hours, and I was drinking as much of my carbs as I could. Felt pretty good, and then basically when things started to get dark and miserable, I could only really eat food when I was running. So whenever I sat down in the car, I really struggled to get any food down me. So gels became pretty important. I didn't use any of them until towards the end, and that was very much forcing them down just so I had something in me. Bananas, I tried to have at every stop, and the thing that was sitting with me the best was the cookies. I found them really easy to eat, and we actually ran out. I got through 3 bags of supermarket cookies, and then we picked some more up from an M&S petrol station that night, about 3 in the morning. But anyway, got through all that. I got through about 11 litres of water in total and didn't really have any issues. Also forgot to mention I had a few block bar chews, which again, if I had them in my bag, were freezing, which was a pain, so they had to stay in the car. And then got through 6 salt tablets as well, just because there were a few points where I wasn't being as strict with my water as I needed to be. Got a bollocking from Johnny. That was the only thing I got told off for with about 8 miles to go. I was just told off for not drinking enough water in the previous section. So fixed that and saw me through. No cramps, no real concerns. Stomach was okay, GI tract GI tract felt okay, and the only real issue I encountered was I didn't really want to continue eating anything sweet, so I wish we'd had a bit more savoury stuff in the car. Number 2, what sort of strategy did I have with clothing and kit, etc.? A lot of people have asked if I only wore one pair of shoes, for example. So, one pair of shoes throughout, no issues whatsoever, no hot spots, no blisters, nothing. Had a bit of tension in the top of my left foot, and the outside right tendon on my right foot was giving me a bit of grief towards the end, but to be honest, I think that was just repetitive strain more than anything else. I was in one jacket, base layer, and a long sleeve top for the majority of it. I actually started in just the base layer and long sleeve top, but when we got to Falkirk, I had to put a second winter jacket on top, and even then I was just warm enough. Hands, okay, but as soon as I stopped for even 10-15 seconds at a time, they just became absolutely Baltic. My whole body became completely freezing if I stopped for a prolonged period of time. So the really important thing in comparison to my trial run from Edinburgh to Glasgow was that I had the car to sit in and rest in when I got from stage to stage, as well as the big camouflage dry robe that you might have seen me in throughout the video. Number 3, how did I approach sleep and caffeine? So I had 10 minutes of sleep throughout, and that was after I just got to Linlithgow. So the worst section of the entire thing was the stretch from just after the Falkirk Tunnel to Linlithgow, where I had my watch on charge in my backpack, so I didn't have any metrics to look at. It was dark, I was a bit delirious, so I wasn't that good at recognising where I was in comparison to the trial run that I did. And it just went on and on and on forever, and I was really, really losing the plot. It was 9.5 miles, so I think it was about 2.5 hours it took me in the end. No, not quite. 2 hours it took, just under, and really miserable. That was when I felt most defeated and where things started to get really hairy up here. But 10 minutes sleep, and I started my caffeine. I had a black coffee at Cadder, which is 6.5 miles or so after Glasgow. That was my first hit of caffeine, and as it was a really bitter black coffee, it did so much for me mentally, just sort of stripping away that layer of sugary, carby horribleness that was sitting there. Got through 4 black coffees, and I was supplementing at every stop with 2 awesome supplements, 60mg caffeine tablets, and that got me through it. Number 4, I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but some people were really interested in my overall pacing and the actual data around things, so I thought I'd touch on that, and my rest strategies. So, my average pace throughout the whole thing, including rest, was 14:06 minute per mile. My average moving pace was 11:39 minute per mile. So my aim throughout the whole thing was to not creep over a 12-minute mile, but what I didn't account for was how valuable mentally and physically those slightly longer periods of rest would be at each stop. So I'd only really factored for 5 minutes maximum at each stop, other than the bits where I'd specified 25 minutes to chat to the Glasgow Warriors players or 20 minutes to get some food at George Square, whatever it was. I'd only really factored for 5 minutes at a time, but I ended up needing about 10 to 15 minutes, which ultimately added up and made the overall speed a bit slower, but my running pace was pretty much bang on what I expected it to be. So I don't know what my top speed was, but I think my quickest mile was 10:41, and that was pretty early doors. But the section from Loch Lomond was really, really pleasant, so I just felt really solid going into that. I did say from the start, do not creep at any point below a 10 minute per mile pace, and I didn't do that at any stage. So heart rate for the first couple of hours didn't creep above 135, which was really encouraging, but towards the end I was basically averaging about 145 at 11:45 minute per mile pace. So in terms of efficiency, all really happy with how things went. It was just a mind game, and just at the end of the day putting one foot in front of the other. Number 5, the highest point and the lowest point. So aside from the obvious, which is the finish, the highest point along the way was the Loch Lomond stretch. It was the most beautiful day. I couldn't have asked for better. Clear skies, no wind, and completely quiet roads other than the odd car going to and from the car park that we were in. The highest point, and just for a really strange reason, was I ran past a Highland cow sitting there chewing on hay, grass, whatever it was, just looking noble as any creature I've ever seen in my life. And I just looked around me, Highland cow here, windy road going down into Balmahar, the town that I was just short of, Loch Lomond to my right, nothing around me. And it just was the most peaceful, serene moment that I've had in living memory, personally. But in terms of a high point on the run, I was just in such a good place at that point. And I will remember that moment in its singularity for the rest of my life. It was just amazing. A complete moment of connection with nature, with Scotland, with the beauty that was around me, and I just absolutely loved it. Lowest point I've already touched upon a little bit was the stretch from just after the Falkirk Tunnel, so Glen Village I think it was called, through to Linlithgow, 9.5 miles of utter misery, no metrics, pure darkness, on my own. I'd had headphones that I was planning on using as my sort of tool to get me through that section, knowing that it was coming for a long time, but they ran out just over 2 miles in, 2 miles-ish I think, because I didn't actually have my watch on. So that was not only did I not have it to get through it, but I was also anticipating it and relying on it. And then when the battery went, I was so pissed off that it just really set me back. That was when, in my head, I started to wonder, was I capable of getting through this? And I was doing the maths. I would reach 78 miles when I got to Linlithgow, which is 3 marathons. And I thought, you know what? 3 marathons is good enough. No one's going to be disappointed. No one's going to think you failed here. People are just going to be happy that you've committed to the cause, and ultimately 94 doesn't matter that much. It was the darkness, it was the pain, it was the suffering, it was the isolation that made me think that way, and I can honestly say that was the only moment where I thought I wasn't going to get this done. Once I got to Linlithgow, I reconnected with Johnny, Craig, and the guys from Land and Sky Media, and I just sat in the car, had some coffee. That was where I had my 10-minute sleep as well. Got the cookie in me, white chocolate special from M&S, class. Got back on my way and it was over. In my head, that period was over and I knew that I was going to be able to get this done. Craig had recalculated a bit of the timings and given me a really clear plan to get through to the end of it. And in my head, it made sense. I thought, you can do this. And I just got my head down and cracked on. So that was the low point, and that was the only real moment that I doubted I was actually going to be able to see it through. Number 6, it's weird, 6. What was the strangest thing I thought about, and what was I thinking in general to get me through it? So in general, it's just the same old. It was a bit of a self-analysis, a bit of a review of everything I'd done to get me into the position I was in general terms, in relation to the Movember campaign itself. And then just how can I turn this into positive, thinking about the future, thinking about really arbitrary things, whether it's what I wanted to eat the following day. I've not tried Greg's Festive Bake yet, make sure you get that done. And then song lyrics, just weird stuff. And actually, the weirdest thing, hands down, was Ian Rankin is a novelist from Edinburgh, and he's done a lot of his work. It's crime novels around Edinburgh, and he's based everything around the city. He's incorporated a lot of the heritage and culture into it, and I've read pretty much all of his books, I believe. And in my head, I was trying to think of a way of incorporating loads of elements from his novels and tying them all into the locations that I'd run through, because I'd gone through parts of Scotland I'd never been through before. And I'd gone on this journey, and I was trying to place what I'd seen, where I'd been, into this little crime novel in my head, trying to tie up the loose ends. I mean, the story was pretty tenuous at best, but I was just trying to place this character that I came up with in my head into these situations, in these different locations, and I was building upon it from stage to stage. I didn't have a conclusion, I didn't have anything. It was just a way to pass the time, playing a little bit of a game with myself in my head. I'm so bad at this. Number 8, the question that I've got a lot, was it number 8? Or was it number 7? Shit, it was number 7. Number 7, question that has come up time and time again, and is what I get asked whenever I've sort of had a broad discussion about what I've got up to this year, is what's next. And I'm afraid I don't have a big reveal or a really wonderful answer to give you. I've got a lot of ideas in my head, but the only thing that I'm committed to properly for next year is the Keltman Extreme Triathlon up in Torridon. So one of the Extreme Triathlon series, it is a 3.2 kilometre swim in a loch full of jellyfish in Shieldag. It is a 200 kilometre bike in and around the mountains up in the northwest of Scotland, and a 42.2 kilometre marathon, run over 2 Munros. And for those that might not know, a Munro is any mountain in Scotland that is over 900 metres. So that will be a pretty disgusting marathon distance run. However, I know that there is no part of the UK, arguably the world, that I've visited where I feel more at peace and just more content with my surroundings than in the really feral parts of Scotland. So looking forward to that. Got a few things up in the air in terms of where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be doing in 2020. So until I know that, I can't commit to any big individual personal challenges. In the meantime, I'm just really looking forward to getting back into open water, back on the bike, and just relearning and re-exploring parts of the UK that I haven't under the guise of my training, which is why I love triathlon training so much, because it gives me an excuse to explore places that I haven't been to before. Number 8, a question that's come up a fair amount as well, and will also be the last one I address in this video. What were the main differences between the 54-mile trial run that I had from Glasgow to Edinburgh solo and the 94-mile event itself? So the surprising answer actually is that mentally, I think the 54-mile trial run was more challenging. And there are a few simple reasons for that, really. So the main one being, I have almost never felt so existentially isolated as I did getting off that train at Glasgow on my own at 10 at night, knowing that I was getting back to Edinburgh on foot. Got to the canal, head torch on, and then it was just bubble of light and my feet in front of me with fox's eyes and the canal to stare at for the next 8 or so hours before I got to some discernible parts of Edinburgh where there were things going on, people to stare at, cars to hear, and things that would just make me feel like I was close by. It was just emotionally exhausting being in that little bubble of pain for so long. As well as that, we had a bit of an oversight in that I was completely self-supplied, so I had about 8.5 kilos worth of water, food, my bloody camera that I'm filming this with, which is about 2 kilos itself, in my backpack. So that meant I set off with a very heavy pack on. About 8.5 kilos on top of my body weight is gonna make a real difference. And after about 15 miles, I was just so pissed off with how much worse I felt than I'd expected in such a short period of time. My traps were killing me, and with extra weight on, your biomechanics change, your gait changes, and it was obviously just a less efficient way of moving for me. So it made me feel like I was less capable than I thought I was, and just pissed me off to no end. And there was no one there that I could complain or be pissed off to, which wasn't helpful either. On the 94-mile run, at any one time I had no more than 2.5 kilos in my bag, 2 litres of water in my camelback, some gels, my phone, at some points a charging pack, and then other bits and bobs in there. But the majority was in the cars or Craig had when he was support running me. Which leads me on to having a support runner. Craig was an absolute trooper and ended up running just shy of 50k himself. He actually, once we finished the event at Murrayfield, walked another 900 yards so he could say that he'd ran 50k, which is what I would have done, to be fair. But he was so essential, just being a heartbeat and someone to talk to and someone to share in the pain of what I was going through at certain points. And I used him at the right times. We worked together to figure out when it would be best to utilise him. And the one bit I wish I'd had him with me, but I appreciate why he wasn't there, was the stretch from Glen Village to Linlithgow, as it was absolutely miserable. But that would have meant that he was doing a 20-mile stint, which just wasn't a realistic demand. So that was massively helpful and is one of the main reasons why actually the 94-mile run up here wasn't as challenging as the trial run. The other thing was just having broader human connection there was amazing. The misery and loneliness that I experienced in the trial run was really quite challenging. I was emotional at the end because I was just so happy to be back in civilization with people and cars and things, and it was such a change. And then this whole Loch Lomond section, I had the camera car, Johnny in his car, and then 3 mates just sort of following around, having the time of their lives, dicking around the whole way. And it just looked like such fun, and meant that when I went from stage to stage, I'd know that there'd be people there I could chat to, reflect on the past 10 miles or whatever it was. They'd look after me. I wouldn't need to think about what I was eating, what I was drinking. They'd just give it to me and I'd get cracking again, knowing that in however many miles time I'd see them again. And again, and again, and again, all the way to the finish, and knowing that those people were waiting there was a real boost for me mentally and emotionally. And then past a certain point, knowing that there were just shy of 80 people waiting in a room for me at Murrayfield was all the boost that I needed to know that I had somewhere to be, and the pain almost subsided to the point where I just knew there was a job that needed done. And whilst it was completely miserable, the end goal was much more prominent than it was with the trial run, because I couldn't get out of my head that whenever it was hard on the trial run, I was like, oh my God, this is 40 miles shorter than you need to do at the end of November. How on earth are you going to get through this? So the joy of finishing the trial run was actually tainted because I knew that it was just a stepping stone to something bigger. But physically, there were certain points along the 94-mile route which were just miserable and were much worse than anything I experienced on the 54-mile run. But mentally, I'm not going to say it was a breeze in comparison, but it was much, much easier to get through. There we have it. I hope that gives you a pretty general debrief. I've not been overly specific with the ins and outs, but I just want you to get a bit of an understanding of what I went through mentally and physically. It was awful in points, it was great at points, it was a very, very therapeutic experience in that I finished that knowing more about myself, more about what I'm capable of than I did before, so that's a huge positive in my mind. Really glad with how it's all been received, and thank you all so much for your support along the way. It's genuinely what helps keep my head down and fighting my way through such things. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do make sure you've given it a thumbs up and subscribe below. And for those of you that, I hope all of you have seen the previous video, the professional video documenting the journey itself. If you haven't, please make sure you have, and if you have done, please do share it with anyone you think might find it interesting or might be able to resonate with the message that is running throughout it. This whole process is about trying to encourage men to be confident in themselves and confident to ask for help if they ever need it. We are all human, we all have mental health, it is a part of our well-being. I just really want everyone to have the confidence to look after themselves if they ever feel that they might need a helping hand. So thank you all again for watching, hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.